Advertising is a $12 billion business. It has been growing, flourishing, and expanding for almost 100 years. Yet a strange and startling fact exists. There is no general economic theory on what advertising does and how it works. Economists handle advertising with suspicion. Its critics give it credit for powers that it does not possess. Its supporters defend it with all sorts of nonsense. What does it do? The secret of the Sphinx is that it has no secret. Perhaps the mystery of the advertising business is that it has no mystery. If you go directly to the heart of a mystery, said Christopher Morley, it ceases to be a mystery and becomes only a question of drainage. Let us try, if we may, for some drainage. For advertising is actually a simple phenomenon in terms of economics. It is merely a substitute for a personal sales force, an extension, if you will, of the merchant who cries aloud his wares. It puts rapidly in print or on radio and television what would otherwise have to be handled by word of mouth. It does this at lower cost. Advertising was born with the Industrial Revolution, when personal selling for mass goods became an impossibility. It grew with the Industrial Revolution, as improvements in technology spewed out still more goods. It became immense as production became immense. But it was always an effect, and never a cause. Advertising has no real magic that is not tied to the product itself. Thus, in good times when money is plentiful, it works magnificently. And in bad times when money is scarce, it follows the sales of products down. Advertising cannot combat a downtrend against a kind of product. Witness buggy whips, celluloid collars, and horses. And it cannot start an uptrend, as we have seen, unless there is some a priori utility or desire. Martin Mayer in Madison Avenue, USA, put it well. As on the political scene, advertising is wind on the surface, sweeping all before it when it blows with the tide, but powerless to prevent a shifting of greater forces. Can it be dispensed with? We debated this question recently with a number of economists, and their conclusion was yes. The reason they gave was an interesting one. They said, the only result would be a change in the timescale, the speed with which a new product would find its own level among the consumers. This conclusion is interesting, but like many pure rationalizations, which are not empirical, it happens to be wrong. For there are many products that cannot demonstrate their own superiority to the consumer, and in today's economy would never find their own level. They would instead die quietly on the economic vine. Let us illustrate this with an imaginary case history. The new entrepreneurs without advertising. A young manufacturer devises a new breakfast food with 1/2 the calories, twice the essential vitamins, and twice the protein. With a taste equal to that of his competitors, it sells at the same price. Simultaneously, his brother devises, by a new process, a cigarette that removes 95% of the tars from the smoke stream, yet is still rich to the taste, delicious to smoke, and satisfying. Both of them, however, have products that are not self-demonstrable to the public. They look, taste, and seem the same as the old, rich, and entrenched brands. There is no advertising, and there is no possibility of marketing either of these brands. A $1 million personal sales force at $2 a call, which is absurdly low, might be able to tell 500,000 people, just once, about these new brands. As we have seen, this would result in no penetration and would achieve nothing. Since the products are new, there is no demand. The giant chain stores, as well as the independents, where every inch of shelf space is a priceless commodity, say, without the demand, we cannot spare you the room. Another factor comes into play. Even if the two new entrepreneurs could get distribution, it would not suffice. For a food will not keep indefinitely and cigarettes stale rapidly. Fast turnover is essential to maintain product quality. The products would die, depriving the economy of some of its competitive vitality. Now let us examine the same case history in terms of what could happen in actual practice. Each manufacturer selects an introductory market. An advertising campaign for the same $1 million now buys 500 million advertising impressions. The young entrepreneurs can now tell 30, 40, or 50 million people over and over again the hidden advantages of these two products. The products may look the same, but people suddenly become aware that they are not the same. Penetration soars. Chains and independents are forced to accept distribution, for the consumer is the ultimate dictator of what goes on the retailer's shelves. Sales begin to mount, for a previous desire exists, on the part of the public for more healthful foods and fewer tars. Profits mount. Profits, in turn, are poured into more advertising and further expansion. Two aggressive new companies are added to the American economy, but something even more important happens. The entrenched companies are forced to defend their own brands. As we have seen, this cannot be done with words. They must improve their products. This they do, and counter-merchandising begins. Still better products emerge. An excellent example of the truth of all this was seen recently in an action of the Federal Trade Commission. This government body coerced the tobacco industry into making no claims about low-tar cigarettes, regardless of whether or not these claims were true. This action came just as two dramatic new cigarettes were coming on the market, bringing the public the lowest tar ranges in history. These brands had cost millions of dollars to develop, but the manufacturers were thus unable to advertise their advantages. Overnight, they vanished from the retailer's shelves. The phrase new entrepreneurs, incidentally, applies not only to a new manufacturer, hopeful, wistful, and alone. It applies equally to mighty General Foods, seeking to introduce a new product against, say, mighty standard brands. For new products stand on their own feet in the marketplace, and the situation does not change. It may seem at first glance of no consequence which firm has the business, but there is an enormous consequence. The producer, undisturbed by new competition, tends to monopolistic practices in form, quality, and price. The necessity for product improvement disappears. The new entrepreneurs vanish from the economic scene. The ultimate of this principle is seen in the USSR. A recent cartoon in Izvestia entitled Twins Against Their Will depicts a real-life situation in the Volga village of Sengele. Here, men, women, and children all wear identical checked hats, checked suits, and checked earmuffs. Because these models are the only ones produced by a producer who lives in no fear of a competitive threat. A casual reference to statistics shows the workings of this dynamic force in the economy. Over 60% of the products now on sale in supermarkets were not on sale 15 years ago. $100 million of the sales of Minnesota mining and manufacturing are in products unheard of 6 years ago. Over 70% of Procter & Gamble's sales are in products designed since 1946. Some 60% of Bristol-Myers sales are from products introduced since 1949. Over half of Lever Brothers sales come from products marketed since 1953. Thus, we arrive at the true role of advertising. It is not to create some new desire and fill it with some useless product for which the public has no real need. The true role of advertising is exactly that of the first salesman ever hired by the first manufacturer, to get business away from his competitors. Or, as the economists phrase it, to shift the demand curve between products. This is the restless American economy. It is also economic liberty, and once economic liberty is abridged or destroyed, all other liberty is abridged or destroyed. Power over a man's subsistence, said Alexander Hamilton, is power over his will. In the 16th century, a young man named Galileo Galilei went up to the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa and dropped 2 cannonballs. When they hit the earth, these cannonballs made an impact which will, without doubt, shape mankind's destiny to the last syllable of recorded time. For they put an end to a method of thinking, and the world can never be the same again. The experiment was a simple one. It had been taught for 2,000 years that a heavy object fell faster than a light one. If it was twice as heavy, it fell twice as fast. The authority? It was no less than the great Aristotle. He had said so, and for 20 centuries, like the processional caterpillars, mankind had accepted his dictum, blindly, as a fact. It came as a shock when Galileo dropped 2 balls, a heavy one and a light one, and the world witnessed that both hit the ground at the same time. It was the beginning of the end of the Aristotelian, prescientific civilization, for as Wendell Johnson points out, what Galileo demonstrated was not so much a fact about falling weights, as a new problem-solving method based not on the authority of age and prestige, but rather on the authority of observation and experiment. Hardly more than 300 years have elapsed since Galileo, And after all, 300 years is but a small part of the morning. Yet in this time, the whole structure of civilization has changed. For scientists began to perform experiments to see what happened when something was done. It was refreshing, this new philosophy of what when. Many facts began to appear suddenly as fables. Wisdom and experience began to appear, often as fallacies. Personal opinion began to appear as just that, personal opinion. How many a scientist, since Galileo, has watched an experiment with wide and wondering eyes and said, things are not what they seem to be. It is time now that advertising men let fall some cannonballs. It is time now to find out not only what makes advertising more effective, but to accord advertising its rightful role in our economy and to put an end to the myths and distortions. For much of the battle between the slave world and the free world today is being fought out on economic grounds, on mankind's desire for a better life. And advertising is the voice of competition, the voice of free enterprise in a free world. It needs facts, not fables. It needs principles and not opinions. The issue, actually, is even wider than economics alone. For since Cain quarreled with Abel, the chasm between brothers has been their inability to talk to each other. And the principles hidden in advertising are fundamentally the principles of all communications. Unfortunately, our advertising awards are still based on opinion, supposition, and aesthetics. We still spend much of our $12 billion a year on wishful thinking, and we have few men who will risk the loneliness of leaning towers. Advertising began as an art, and too many advertising men want it to remain that way. A never-never land where they can say, this is right because we feel it's right. Earlier, we told the story of the panel of top creative people from 25 big agencies who were asked to pick the 3 worst television commercials of the past several years, and how they picked as the worst 2 of the most electric successes of the past several decades. I spent several hours with one member of this panel, an agency president. Out of curiosity, I showed him Nielsen figures, penetration charts, market data, some rather revealing facts. He seemed to be in agreement until I mentioned the words, advertising laws. Laws, he said. The minute you introduce these, you destroy art, and advertising is an art. Too many agency men, and clients too, agree. They shy away from principles or any talk of advertising laws. They seem to think that principles restrict creative effort rather than guiding it and making it richer and more profitable. Such a viewpoint is, of course, the opposite of the scientific mind. Scientists believe only what they can weigh, measure, calculate, and observe. This is why scientists do not believe in ghosts. They seek out facts, they deduce principles, and then within them let their imaginations run riot. In this way, scientists have remade the world. Most advertising men, however, are still necromancers at heart. They do believe in ghosts. They listen to voodoo drums, whisper magic incantations, and mix in their potions eye of newt and toe of frog. Someday, like the barber surgeons of 400 years ago, they must begin to look objectively at their craft. Somewhere in our business is the first true anatomist, a Vesalius who will begin to trace the linkage of the tendons, or a Harvey who will begin to speculate about the circulation of the blood. Advertising will be on the way, then, to becoming a profession. Thank you for watching until the end. If you want to go deep down into the rabbit hole of marketing and persuasion, click the link in the description where you will find many fundamental books about copywriting, psychology, and persuasion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. See you in the next one.